Hi there, I'm starting a small video series, just a couple of videos covering how we can make an RPG in MakeCode. Now an RPG is a very special type of genre of game that's quite specific. It's got things like quests, loot, got things like levels, stats and so on. And we're going to be making one of these in a game engine called MakeCode Arcade. This is only available on the internet, so you'll need a browser. I have a browser here, and the address is arcade.makecode.com. And as soon as you go to that website, you should see this. This is the project page. It's where you can create projects and view lots of tutorials and so on. We're going to be creating a project, and over a course of 5 or so sessions, we'll be expanding on that project until we've got a fully fledged RPG that we can play. So let's click New Project and let's give a good name for what our game's going to be. I'm going to call my game Lost in Wales because it's going to have a story theme behind it, and that story is, I don't know, maybe you've broken down in Wales, you're driving along your car and it's broken down, you're stuck in Wales, you appear to be in an undiscovered part where magic roams wild. So I'm going to call it Lost in Wales. Now we can go ahead and click Create. Now, the first thing to be aware of with MakeCode Arcade is sometimes it can get a little glitchy, and sometimes it can forget your code. If that happens, sometimes you can fix it, sometimes you just can't. Sometimes MakeCode just wants to restart, something's gone wrong with it, and so on. So the important thing to do is to always save your work. It's the most important thing because it's the only way your code is ever going to be safe, is if you keep on saving it every time you do lots of changes or make a big change, something like that. To save your game, we can click this save icon down here at the bottom. Okay. Now, one thing that MakeCode Arcade does, which is very weird, is it actually saves your game as an image. It saves it as a .png, a image file. So this can be a little bit confusing, but what's actually happening is MakeCode is storing all of your code in the hidden metadata behind that image. So, it's got all the details secretly in that image so that it's stored safe. So I'm going to click Save File, and it's going to get my computer to save it somewhere in my files. So I could save it on my desktop, I could save it in my downloads, documents, anywhere I want to. The important thing is that I remember where I saved it. Okay, so you pick somewhere to save, then you can go ahead and click Got it. And your code is now saved. And every time you do a big change, or you add a load of code, or you make a big alteration, you can click Save again to do the whole thing again. And it's good to keep multiple versions, just in case you make a mistake and you need to go back a version, or so on. If you need to load your game back into MakeCode, you can go to the project browser. I clicked Home to get there, but you could also get there just by going to arcade.makecode.com again. You can click Import over here, and you can import file. Okay, and here it's asking you to upload one of the images you've saved again. So we can upload from our computer any code that we've saved. So let's click Browse, and we can find the game. Or in this case, I've got a version here, and we can see, remember where we saved it, pick the right one, and click Open, and it will load it up, and you'll be able to carry on working with it. It's tempting to forget to save. MakeCode does attempt to try and remember what you were working on last time. So if you visit MakeCode regularly, you might see lots of your projects stacked up in here. But if you ever delete your browsing history or change computers or whatever, it will just get rid of those. It will just completely forget them. So the only safe way is with this save button down here. Okay, with all that gubbins out of the way, we can start making our game. And the first thing that we need is an image for our player. We need a player to have an appearance. So we can use the Assets tab for this. So I'm looking along at the top. We've got Blocks, JavaScript, and Assets. I'm going to click Assets. Assets are all the things that you want to use later on or return to. All the visual things. So things like images, things like animations, things like tile maps. We'll get onto those later. But here we can create an asset to represent our player as they walk around normally. So we can click New Asset, and we can click Image, because we want an image of the player. And we can design it here. So I'm just going to do something very basic. You can spend as long as you like on this. Oh, that's too big. If I want to do a simple stick figure, I could do something a little bit like this. Over on the left, you've got your draw tools. So you've got pen, you've got rectangle, circle, line, fill, erase, select and move. So this one allows you to select a part and then move it around. Or the hand tool, which just allows you to move around your image. And we've got things like mirror, flip, rotate, and change size of the pen. But you can make your design to be whatever you like. There we are, I've done a simple stick figure. The important thing is that when you've designed it, you make sure to give it a sensible name. That can be done in the bottom bar down here, this large white bar at the bottom. This is going to be the name of the asset. So this is the image of the player. So I'm going to call this player image with no space. Before we click done, there's a couple of optional things that I should mention. Firstly, if you want the sprite to be bigger, if you want the image to be bigger, you can look down in the bottom left and we've got these two numbers. The first one is how wide the image is in pixels. So at the moment this is 16 pixels wide. And the second one is how tall the image is in pixels. So at the moment we've got 16 by 16. So if I wanted to make it wider, I could type in a larger number like 32. And we can see that it's gone wider. I'm going to take that back to 16 though, because it's just nice and easy if everything's kind of in the same scale at being 16. Additionally, if you don't fancy drawing things yourself, you can click on this gallery tab and you can load things in from the gallery. These are pre-made sprites, so you've got everything from player characters, fish, cats, trees, cars, and so on. And if you scroll a little bit further, we get into tiles, but we'll come on to tiles later. So if I wanted my player to be a duck, I could select a duck instead. And in fact, I'm going to do that because I think a duck looks better than a stick person. Okay, so I'm going to click done. And we can now see that we've got something in our asset tab. If I click on it, we can see that it's called player image, which is what I called it. And we've got options to edit, duplicate, copy, and delete. Now, we've got our player our player image. Now we can actually turn this into something that moves. And to do that, I need to go to the blocks tab up at the top. Now in wrong engine. In MakeCode Arcade, sprites are the things that we want if we're trying to make something move or interact. So we've created an image of the player, but we've not got something that can move around. And for that, we need to create a sprite. So at the moment, looking over on the right, I've got my code area. And in here, I've got a block called onStart. This is called an event block. And you can tell it's an event block because it's got a completely flat top and is a kind of C shape. Event blocks will run whatever's inside the C shape depending on what the event is. So in this case, the event is on start. That means that everything that's inside this C shape will run or will happen when the game starts. And the first thing we're going to do on start is we're going to create a sprite that wears the image of our player. We're going to create a sprite to represent the player. So we're going to go over to the code panel on the left. This is kind of like your toolbox, which contains all the blocks of code you could possibly need. And the first panel we're going to look at is called Sprites. So let's click on that. And let's zoom out a little bit. There's undo and zoom out and redo down over in the corner here. But I'm zooming out so we can see that in the Sprites panel, the first block of code is one called set my sprite to sprite of kind player. This block is very useful in that it creates a sprite, and it does that in a very special way. So I'm going to grab this block and I'm just going to pick it up and I'm going to drag it into onStart. Okay, let's zoom in a little bit and take a look at what is going on. So let's diagnose what this does. First things first, this pinkish red block, this is a setting block. And what it's doing is it's giving a name to the sprite we are creating with this blue block. Okay. At the moment, it's called our sprite my sprite. That's not a very good name for it. And the reason is because every time you try and create something new in MakeCode, it almost always defaults to calling it my sprite, which can get very annoying indeed. And it's a cause of a lot of errors. So we need to give it a name that's better than my sprite. And to do that, I'm going to click this drop down arrow here. And we get to make a new variable or rename the variable or delete the variable. We're going to make a new variable. And a variable is just something that has a name that stores something else. You know, it's just a way of remembering data. And in this case, we need a new variable that remembers that we've created a sprite called, well, you know, it's going to be our player sprite. Speaking of which, that's a good name to call this variable. Player sprite. Okay, I'm going to click OK. So we're setting the player sprite to a new sprite with no image at the moment of kind player. We want to keep the of kind player because this is going to be our player sprite, but we need to make sure we give it an appropriate image. So to do that, I'm going to click in this grey square here, and this brings up the image editor. And one thing you could do is you could make a new player image here, or instead you can go to the My Assets tab at the top, and you can find the player image that you've already created. So I'm going to click on the duck, which was my player image, and we can see it's still called player image down there. And I'm going to click Done. So we should now have a player sprite that is wearing the player image. And if we take a look over here, we have this bluish color thing. This is the simulator. So the simulator can simulate you pressing buttons on the controller like A or B or the directional pad. We've got some controls for the simulator like stop, restart, debug, turn off volume, what's that one? View simulator, keyboard shortcuts and so on. And there's also one to launch in full screen. And if I do that just now, we can see that I've got my player sprite hanging out in the middle of the screen, doing nothing at the moment, and that's because we've not given it any code to do. So I'm going to minimize that and press stop, so it's not taking up too much of my computing power to keep that running. This means we can move on to the next bit, which is to actually get our player sprite doing something. And the first thing we should probably do is we should get the player sprite to move. Okay. That is a form of control. The player is going to use the controls to move the sprite. So the block that we'll be looking for is in the controller panel of the toolbox. So clicking on the controller panel, I can see I have got all the blocks related to using the controls. I'm interested in this first one, this one here called Move My Sprite with Buttons. This block is a nice, simple block that basically allows the sprite to be controlled with the direction keys. So the D-pad over on the left here. So I'm going to pick this block up and I'm going to put it underneath the place where we set the player sprite. And the reason why we are doing that is because we can't tell the player sprite to move before we've created the player sprite. It's like trying to drive a car that's not been built yet. So for that reason, this block needs to go underneath the place where we created the player sprite in the first place. Now, the eagle-eyed amongst you will have realized that there is a little warning triangle here. That means that we have an error. And if I take my mouse and hover over that error, it will tell me about it a little bit. But if I click on that error, it'll give me much more detail. And the error is variable mySprite is never assigned. And what this means is mySprite hasn't been created at all. If I click that to get rid of the to minimize the error, and we look at our top line of code, we're creating player sprite here. That's not the same as my sprite. So my sprite's never been created. So as I said, you can't drive the car if the car's not been built. In this case, my sprite has not been built. And as I said, we don't want to use my sprite anyway. We want to use player sprite. So I'm going to click the drop down arrow, and it gives me the opportunity to change which variable we are using here. And in this case, we want to use the player sprite variable. So I'm going to click on that. We must wait a couple of seconds for the error to disappear, and it has. And now, if I go back to the simulator on the left and click play, I should be able to move my player with the buttons. Now, for testing purposes, if you're on a computer, you can use buttons on your keyboard instead of having to click the ones on screen. So I can use the arrow keys on my keyboard to test that out easier. Okay. Let's press stop. Let's minimize that. Okay. So we have a player character, and at the moment the player character is running around, but the player character is running around in empty nothingness, which is a little bit boring for a game. What we are going to do next is we are going to create a tile map. A tile map is a special type of background that is made up of lots of different tiles. Now, tiles have different images on each tile, and when you combine them together you can get a very nice looking world. And a big part of RPGs is making the world very intricate and very believable. So we're going to have to go to the Assets tab again, because we need to now make a tile map asset. So I'm going to click on Assets. Now we can click New Asset, and this time we want to make a tile map. A tile map is made up of lots of tiles, but we're just going to use the default tiles for now, so we can just go ahead and make a plain old tile map just by clicking that. Now, we're into the tile map editor, which is a little bit different to the sprite editor or the image editor. In the image editor, when you clicked, it placed down a pixel. Now, in the tile map editor, instead of placing down a pixel, it places down a tile. And if we take our gaze over to the left, we can see that we have some tiles on offer here. These are the inbuilt tiles. Using the arrows at the bottom, I can scroll through several pages to find a tile I like. Or if I click the drop-down arrow, there are more themes available. So we can have a forest theme, or an aquatic theme, or a dungeon theme, or a miscellaneous theme. And of course you can mix and match tiles from all of these themes. If you wanted to make your own tiles, there is a My Tiles tab over on the left, where we can click the plus icon to make and draw a new tile. But instead, just for ease of use, I'm going to use all of the inbuilt tiles. So first things first, let's put down some ground. I'm going to choose this sort of middle tile here, which is just plain. And just to get things started, I'm going to fill the whole map with that. So looking at the top, we've got our familiar tools like the pencil, the eraser, the rectangle. I'm just going to use the fill tool, and with this tile selected, fill the whole map in. And now the whole map looks as if it's that tile. Now I can add a little bit of detail. So I have these edge tiles here. I can put a corner. Oh, that was a fill. That was a mistake. I meant to use the pen tool. I'm going to click undo down in the bottom right. As I was saying, I'm going to use the pen tool this time and click the corner tile so I can do the top left corner. And let's do the one for the top right corner, and the bottom right, and the bottom left. Now we can do the sides. Rather than draw the sides one at a time, I'm going to use the line tool to draw them in one long line. So that's the left hand side, the bottom side, the right hand side, and finally the top side. And that's given a nice border to our world. There's nothing stopping me from going and putting even more detail in, so I might want to put in a little patch of grass. You know, mix and match it up with different types of grass. I might want to put a border around that. So corner tile, edge tile, corner tile, edge tile, edge tile, right hand tile. You can spend as much or as little time on it as you like. But I can add all sorts. I can even add rocks and boulders in the way. As experiment by putting down this one grassy boulder. I might put it here. Maybe a couple more over here. If I look over here, I can see that there are more options as well. One thing I might want is I might want a bit of a cliff in the middle of the map. So I'm going to use these ones here. These are the tops of the cliff. Oh, I clicked off by mistake. Sorry. As I was saying, these are the tops of the cliff. However, if I look over onto the next page, I can see that these are the bottoms of the cliff. So I'm going to combine those two together to get some interesting cliff effects. So let's make a kind of a wall here. And let's put the bottom of the thing on. Now you may notice this checkerboard pattern, this white and grey checkerboard pattern poking out from underneath. That means that the tile we've just put down has some invisible parts, and that's going to cause a problem for us later. But we're going to go and fix that in a bit. Before we do that, I'd like to draw your attention to one more thing that we could add to this. At the moment, we've got these cliffs and these blocks in the way, but there is no way for our player sprite to know what is solid and what they can walk through. So if I were to use this tile map as it is right now, the player would be able to walk through this cliff, which isn't ideal. First things first, I need to make this cliff solid. And to do that, I'm going to use the wall tool. Looking over on the left, we can see that there is a button here that looks like a 3D brick wall. If I click on that, it means I'm now in wall drawing mode. And what that means is everywhere I click, if I've got the pen tool selected, because these tools up here work the same way for the wall. If I click, I put a red square over a certain tile. And what this does is it makes that tile solid. So I've made these boulders solid. Let's make this cliff solid as well. Okay. And if I wanted to, I could make sort of invisible areas, like no player can get into. But for now, I'm just going to delete that. Okay, to get out of wall drawing mode, we can move our mouse over to the left and click on the tiles again, and we're back into tile drawing mode. Okay, if you can't see the red squares, you need to make sure that this little check mark over in the top right for showing walls is switched on. Finally, before we move on, it's important to give our tile map a name, because again, it is an asset, and assets should have a sensible name. The MakeCode editor has decided to call this one Level 1. I think that's a fair enough name, so I'm just going to follow its recommendation and just click Done. And now we have a tile map. And it's called Level 1. Let's load that into our game. To do that, we're going to go back to Blocks. And we need to do that in Start. When the game starts, we need to tell it to load the tile map as the background. And that's to do with Scene, so it's in the Scene panel. The Scene panel contains everything to do with things being displayed kind of in the background or on the screen. Okay. I need to scroll down until I find this Set Tile Map 2 white square. Set Tile Map 2. That's the block I want. So I'm going to pick that up and I'm going to put it inside on Start. At the moment it's setting the tile map to nothing, so I need to click in the white square and I can click over in the Assets tab, in the My Assets tab, and I can pick the tile map that I just created. So click that and there we are, and click Done. So now we have created a tile map, and if I open the simulator up, we can see that my player is now walking around a fully realized world. There's a small problem though. If I go off screen, I can't see my player, so my player could be doing anything and I wouldn't know. In fact, I've gotten them stuck. I've lost them on the screen. I don't know where they are. So we're going to fix that next. Okay, so let's minimize that. To fix that, we need the camera. That is everything that we can see in the screen. We need that to be focused on the player. So to find that, I need to go to Scene again. And scrolling down all the way to the bottom, in the third from the bottom, we've got this camera follow my sprite block. This basically says follow the sprite. So I'm going to grab that block, camera follow sprite, and I'm going to put it in on Start, but I need to change my sprite out because my sprite doesn't exist. I need to change that to player sprite. And let's wait for the error to go away. There we are. It is all happy. And now when I try it, clicking play, when I move, the camera follows the duck. And we can see that if I try and walk through a boulder, because I put the wall there, it doesn't let the duck walk through. And the same goes for the cliff. Now, you might be spotting a problem with the boulders and the cliff. That is, they've got a kind of a black border around them. That is because the tiles we used had a little bit of transparency. So you can see through to the background. And at the moment, the background is just the solid colour black. So there are two ways to fix that problem. The first way is to create some of our own tiles that blend the background tile with the tile that we want more cleanly without using transparency. That is an extension if you want to challenge yourself. However, there is an easier method. And the easier method is to just change the background color to something that looks a little bit close to what you're using as the background of your tile map. To change background color, we can go to Scene. And in Scene, we've got two options. We can set the background color or we can set the background image. The best one to use is background color because the image does not move at the same, does not move relative to the tile map. So if you've got something on the background image shining through, it'll look like it's sliding around underneath the world. Maybe you can get an interesting effect with that, but it's up to you. Instead, we're going to use the set background color block. Set background color from Scene. And we're going to put it in on Start. And clicking on the blob, I can choose the colour that's closest to what's used for the background of my tile map. In which this case, it's this kind of pinkish, peachish, cappuccino colour. Gonna click that. And now when I test it in the simulator, things like the boulders blend in much better. They don't look so broken. And the cliff looks much more natural now. Okay. The first step now to make our RPG more interesting is to add an enemy. Now, lots of RPGs involve a lot of combat, but there's a couple of RPGs out there which are much more relaxed, where they don't do any kind of fighting. That being said, you can still have creatures walking around your world that you can't attack if you want to do a non-violent RPG, but for the purposes of this demonstration, we're going to make an enemy that we can attack in later videos. So, just as we did with player, we're going to go to assets and we're going to create a new image for our enemy. So I click new asset, going to click image, and I can draw something out here, or I can go to gallery and I can pick something that's been made already. So maybe I want my enemy to be a fish, or an American football player, or a bat. Let us choose... what should we choose? Our enemy is going to be a computer, because why not? Again, we need to give it a sensible name. So looking at this bar down at the bottom, I need to give it a name that represents what it is. And this is going to be my enemy image with no space. And I'm going to click done. So now I have a player image and an enemy image. However, I don't have an enemy sprite. And that's what we are going to do next. So we're going to go over to blocks. In blocks, we can create the sprite for the enemy. And we're going to do that pretty much the same way as we created the player. We're going to go to sprites. We're going to set my sprite to sprite of kind player, but we're going to change that. So I'm going to bring out the whole block. So set my sprite to sprite of kind player. Bring out that block. Put it in on start. And again, I need to make a new variable because we don't like using my sprite. So drop down arrow, new variable, enemy sprite, and click OK. Next, we need to make sure we choose the right image. At the moment, the image is blank, so clicking in there, it gives me a sprite editor, but instead, if I go to my assets, I can pick up the enemy image. And remember, mine was a computer for some reason. That is my enemy. Let's click done. So we've created an enemy sprite, we've given it the right image, but at the moment it's set to kind player. That's not going to work very well. We need to use the drop down arrow and change it to enemy type. Okay. Now, if I click play and move around, we can see that there is now an enemy on screen. It doesn't do anything, it just stays there. Okay. We might want to change the location of the enemy at the moment, because if I click play, let's click play again. If I click play, we can see that the enemy starts life directly on top of the player. And the reason why is because every time you create a new sprite, it will put their default starting location to 8060. And what it means by that is it means it places it 80 pixels away from the left and 60 pixels away from the top. And we can see that we created the player. So when we created the player, that would have placed it at 8060. And when we created the enemy, well, that would have placed the enemy at 8060. That is not a good idea because you'll be starting the game with the enemy on top of you, which is not good because it'll kill you instantly. So next, we're going to add the bit of code that's going to put the enemy somewhere else. And if we go to sprites and scroll down, in sprites, the third block down is a very useful block. It's the set my sprite position to X, Y. What this does is it sets the position of a sprite. It sets it to an X value and a Y value. So I'm going to grab this here and put it underneath. It's going to complain because my sprite doesn't exist. So there we are on cue. So I'm going to use the drop down arrow and we're wanting to change the enemy's location. So I'm going to change enemy sprite. Wait for the error to go away. Now, as to what location to choose, well, at the moment it's set to 0, 0. 0, 0 is the top left of the screen, and it's so far in the corner of the screen that it's not really easy to see it all. If we click on the X, we can choose with a slider where it appears on the screen, or we can actually click a point on the screen for it to turn up. Now, this is just in terms of the screen at the moment, but technically our tile map is larger than the screen. So we can put in values that are greater than the width of the screen. But let's just say I want it to appear kind of in the bottom right for now. I'm going to choose x equals 129 and y equals 88. So I can type it in as well, x equals 129 and y equals 88. Let's click play to see if that works. Okay, that works perfectly. The location of the enemy is now 129 across and 88 down. And when I start the game, it no longer spawns on top of me. Okay. Now, an important factor of many RPGs is the use of randomness. You might have things like random encounters or a random chance to find something useful. We're going to make our game more interesting by making the location of the enemy random. The reason why we are doing that is because if your enemy appears in the same place every time, then the player will just learn to avoid it. So if we make the location of the enemy random, that should be more interesting. To get randomness, we can go to the Math tab, and in this panel, scrolling down, we can find this oval-shaped Pick Random 0 to 10 block. And this will pick a random number between 0 and 10. If I grab this, and I pick it up and put it to I replace the number in the X slot with it. What this means now is that it will set the position of the enemy to be at a random horizontal position from 0 to 10. Which is not very large. So what this means is when our enemy spawns, it will be in a position that's 0 to 10 pixels away from the left-hand side. So we need to increase some numbers here. If we increase the 0 upwards, this means that the enemy won't spawn too far left. So it'll spawn more likely to be in the middle. So I might want to choose a number like 20. Let's go 32 actually to be safe. Now the number here, the upper limit, will be the just before the entire width of the tile map, which comes to around, the width of the tile map is 255 if you use the same settings I did. So let's make that a little bit smaller at 220. So now the X location of the X coordinate of the enemy will be random. Let's do the same for Y, because at the moment Y is set to 88 still. Let's go Math. Let's find random, pick random. And again, I need to pick a number that's not too far to the top, so a little bit down from the top. Let's say 32. And not too far down, not too far beyond the bottom. And the bottom is 255, so let's choose again 220. Let's click play and see where our enemy spawns. Well, this time the enemy spawned right next to me, so that was a little bit annoying. Let's click random again. Sorry, not random, start again. Again, the enemy spawned there. Let's click try again. It's over there now. It's on top of me now. It's down there. Okay, we've finally got it off screen. Let's go and find it. It's not over there. It's not down there. Okay, it is there. Now, I won't be covering it in this series of videos, but there is a chance that the enemy will spawn inside an object. So at the moment, it's kind of almost inside the wall. If you want to fix that, there's a nice way of doing that, but that's a more advanced step. Okay, finally, before we finish up, there is something that is a little more interesting. Rather than just having one enemy, let's make it so we have a few more. So, to create more enemies, the easiest way to do that is to repeat these two blocks of code again. And we can do that very easily in the loops panel, where we have this option here, repeat 4 times. And that will repeat a bunch of code. So I'm going to grab this, and I'm going to drag it in so it surrounds both those lines of code. So at the moment, we're saying repeat these 2 lines of code 4 times. That means I will have 4 enemies total, and they'll all have random positions. I can turn that number up to have more enemies, or I can turn it down to have fewer. If I turn it up too high, it will soon become that there are so many that the MakeCode simulator can't cope, in which case it might freeze the game. So we're not going to have too many. I'm going to keep it at 4, just for simplicity. Let's click play and see where they turn up. There's one, there's another, there's the other 2. If I click restart, we can see that they've got brand new locations this time. And there we are. That begins our journey into making RPGs. The full code is available on the website being bit.ly/technoclubs, where you can find this website. In any case, I hope you enjoyed, and stay tuned for the next video.